So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming today. Thanks for finding us here. This is a huge maze of buildings I found this morning. So, and hopefully the wind will diminish after we get out of here. And so what I'd like to do first is just introduce myself and Footloose, Montana. I am Claire Bielman. I am with Footloose, Montana. We're a nonprofit group aimed at educating the public about trapping and promoting trap-free public lands in Montana. And you can find more information about us, of course, online, and most importantly, up-to-date information on our Facebook page. I'm not necessarily a huge Facebook fan. I find it an interesting rabbit hole of society. But one of the key things that we're constantly being asked about is where are traps on the landscape on public land. And the fact is that generally no one knows. Even those who regulate trapping, FWP, don't necessarily know where traps are. So if you find traps or if we know about traps, we're always posting that on our Facebook page. So it's a great way of sharing up-to-the-minute information. Okay. So the format for today's workshop, what I want to talk about is the types of trapping that happen in Montana. Generally, when I ask people about trapping, they ask me, trapping what? And if you talk to youngsters, they think it's music, actually. I learned that. There's a type of music called trap music. We'll actually define what kind of trapping we're talking about, what kind of trapping, where it's happening, and when it happens in the state. Then the other question is, what is legal? What are the regulations about trapping in the state of Montana? Because they tend to vary a lot. And we'll focus on what's legal on public land. And then I want to introduce you to three types of traps, the common types of traps. And there are some are on your chairs and under your chairs that will look at how they work, how they're designed, and most importantly, how to open them up to get your pet out of those traps. And you'll get a chance to see me work with those traps and then get some hands-on practice with those traps yourself. Okay. And then after I've talked about trapping, Dr. Mary Ellen Prince is here. She's a veterinarian with Four Paws Vet Clinic in Missoula to give you what is probably the real information you want to know is what about your pet? Typically, we tend to thinking about dogs that might be with us as we're recreating on public land, but cats are also commonly victims of traps as well. And some people walk their cats too. I've never tried that. When I say pet, mostly we're thinking about dogs. So Dr. Prince will help show us ways of safely handling your dog and types of injuries and first aid things that you can have with you and to think about with after you get your dog out of the trap. Okay. And I do want to encourage questions as we go through. There are usually a lot more questions that are brought up as we go through some of the details of this. One of the key departments in Montana that we're going to be talking about today is FWP, or Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks was established by the Montana legislature in the early 1900s. The whole point about FWP is to manage our wildlife and the habitat that sustains our wildlife in the state of Montana. And FWP is the department that regulates trapping and other types of wildlife interfacing activities. How many of you have had a trapping license? Fishing? Hunting? Okay. Trapping, fishing, hunting, you get licenses for those, and a lot of those regulations are available for you. All those are available for you from FWP. Every year, fishing regulations change. Every year, hunting regulations change. Same thing with trapping. Trapping regulations change over time. And so one of the ways that you can be aware of what is legal, and by regulations, these are laws. If you don't follow regulation, you're breaking a law. I've got copies of current trapping regulation up here if you want them. You can also download and print copies and find a ton of information about FWP and activities that it regulates on its website. I find this website incredibly useful, actually. For example, you can download all of the wolf harvest reports since wolves were first hunted and trapped in Montana. In fact, you can even get a dot map of where every single wolf was killed every year. Okay, it's a lot of information up here to look at. So we'll be talking about FWP a fair amount because they are the folks that regulate trapping, and they are the folks that want input from everyone on how trapping happens in Montana. The key things that I want to try to make you aware of is how you, as a non-trapper, can provide input to FWP about how trapping affects you and how you would like to see trapping regulated. Because remember, FWP manages wildlife for all Montanans and future generations of Montanans, right? Not just those who go hunt, fish, and trap. Okay. And so one of the ways to provide input to FWP is through this Trapping Advisory Committee, which was set up about a year ago to look at some of the potential conflicts that are happening on the landscape with traps and pets and non-trapping public. The Trapping Advisory Committee is wrapping up its whole point next April, this April. And what the whole point about Trapping Advisory Committee is to provide the Fish and Wildlife, Fish and Game Commission with some suggestions on how to improve regulation for trapping to avoid conflict with non-trapping public. Okay? And one of the things I'm going to tell you is that this TAC committee hears from trappers every single time they meet. And they hear from tens of trappers at least every single time they meet. The non-trapping public rarely gives this committee input. There's one last meeting of this Trapping Advisory Committee, and that's at the beginning of April. It's at the Helena Wild Center, just on the east side of Helena, and they listen to public comments during their lunch period on the 2nd and the 3rd. Also, since this is their final meeting and they're going to be talking about final recommendations, the Director of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Martha Williams, will be at the April 3rd meeting. Okay? So this is a great place to provide your comments to the specific committee that was established to avoid conflicts between the trapping and non-trapping public. Okay. If you cannot make that meeting, you can also email your comments to John Borey, who is a Fish and Wildlife and Parks employee who is helping to run how this advisory committee works. Yes?
Do you have any sense of who is on the advisory committee?
You can actually see all of that on the trapping page. If you go back to that fwp.mt.gov website, and you want to look for the trapping homepage, where would you find it? It's under hunting. Okay? So there's a hunting homepage, and there's a fishing homepage, there's a parks homepage, and trapping is under hunting. Go there under hunting, you can find the trapping homepage, and you can find out about who's on that committee. You can also get minutes from all of the previous meetings and look at what they've been talking about. One of the key things that this advisory committee has been talking about is mandatory trapper education, a requirement that, much like for hunting, if you want a hunting license in Montana, you have to have passed a hunter education course, right? So the same is not necessarily true for trappers. If you want to trap wolves, you have to pass a wolf trapping certification course. But there's a whole host of other animals that get trapped year-round, no trapping education required. The TAC is actually proposing that there will be mandatory trapper education for all trappers. That's one of their suggestions that they're mulling over and seems likely, okay, as an example. One other issue is looking at mandatory time check or intervals under which trappers need to go back and check their traps. That is not necessary in the state of Montana for all trapping. It is in a lot of other states. Okay. So I think I'll be raising probably a lot of suggestions along the way. Yeah.
Who would enforce that?
FWP.
How they know that if they don't know what
So this is a question that commonly comes up, and it goes through with wardens, and it's a lot like how they would enforce regulations for all other activities, and a lot of it is post facto, people getting caught by other people, right? And the fact is that if the regulation is there, it is also telling us how we should be operating. You know, without having those regulations of trap check requirements and education, it shows people that the state of Montana doesn't think those are necessary, right? So there's a lot of things to think about with regulation, and enforcing these is tricky, but it does happen.
This is not the committee to say we want it out of state.
No. What this committee is looking at is how to look at conflicts that are happening right now and how to navigate those conflicts. They're not interested in getting rid of trapping.
Yeah, but actually the name of that trapping advisory committee is wrong, because then it should be called trapping conflict, you know.
Yeah.
If they don't take any input from the non-trapping public.
They're taking input from the non-trapping public. So the members of this committee, to get back to the first question, there are non-trappers on this committee. They are the minority. So the FWP has tried to have this committee represent what they think is the spectrum of Montanans as a whole. I would say it's leaning towards trappers much more heavily. Most of the people on this committee are trappers. But there are also veterinarians, and there are also animal advocates on this committee as well.
Is there a state with what is considered enlightened, to use a word sarcastically, enlightened trapping regulations that we could look at as something to learn from?
Yeah, there are, and it depends on how you want to do that. There are rankings of states by wildlife and animal advocacy groups that rank or give report card grades like A+ to F- of states based on the regulations. And they have some of their key hallmarks like mandatory trap check times to reduce suffering of animals, to reduce lethality to non-target animals, things like that. They also look at if education is required, what kinds of trapping is allowed to happen. So you can look for a report card or a grade for states on trapping regulation, and Montana is typically pretty low on it, mainly because we don't have mandatory trap check times. That's a real problem. So another way to provide consistent input is to the commission itself. This advisory committee is supposed to provide recommendations to this commission. This commission actually really runs FWP in combination with input from the legislature. So these are the people, they are appointed by the governor, and they regularly meet throughout the year. You can see meeting times, dates, and minutes from every past commission meeting on the website. Their next meeting is in Helena on April 25th. I don't know what their agenda is for that day, but at the end of every meeting, they take public comment on anything you want to say. And I've sat in on these meetings, and I think this commission really does try to at least take in input. I don't know how well they apply it, but the more they hear from a diversity of Montanans, the more they're hearing the reality of the diversity of Montanans. You can attend this meeting yourself in Helena. It's at the same Helena Wild building. Or you can also go to the local FWP office that's out on Spurgeon Road, and you can attend via satellite TV connection. You can also send email comments directly to the commission as well. And they can be about whatever you want. And you can also go past all of these two, the committee and the commission, and go straight to the headquarters, the people who run FWP. The director of FWP is Martha Williams, and you can always send comments directly to her as well. And all of these addresses are online for you to take a look at. You can find every single FW employee and contact information pretty readily. One of the key things that I really want to suggest to you guys today are some of the things that I find that are inconsistent when you look at hunting and fishing regulation and compare them to trapping. And also suggest some things that could maybe be improved or better written for the entire public when in relation to trapping. So I think we'll find some suggestions along the way here, in addition to what you might have as well. Okay. So FWP has split up the state of Montana into 7 administrative regions, and we're here in Region 2. So Region 2 is in central western Montana. What's interesting, and our main office is here in Missoula on Spurgeon Road. What's interesting about Montana, and I think everybody who's traveled around Montana, is what you find over here, say in Region 7 and 6, is vastly different than what you find over on the western side of the Continental Divide. And that's especially true when it comes to public land. Okay? So how much of Region 2 do you think is public land? And by public land, that means Forest Service land, that means Bureau of BLM land, that also means state-owned land. This also would involve national wildlife refuges. That's what I'm talking about with public land.
I would say based on the size of that we probably have the most.
What proportion of the land here? 75%? It's a little lower. 60. Yeah, it's just a little over 62%.
Wow.
Now, if we flip over to Region 7, how much public land would FWP find in Region 7, do you think?
0.
It's about 20%. And the ownership changes dramatically too. In our neck of the woods here from Region 1 to 3, a lot of what we mean by public land is Forest Service land, U.S. Federal Forest Service land. If you go over here towards the eastern part of the state, a lot of the public land becomes Bureau of Land Management, or BLM land. So even some of the rules and how things are dealt with changes pretty significantly as well. What is interesting is that Region 2 here has about 18% of the population of this state. And you look at how big Region 2 is, it's not 18% of the state. So that's another issue that I think we're finding here on the western side of the state, is we got a lot of people in smaller areas more and more so, right? Everybody's trying to use this public land more and more. And that, I think, is something that we need to be thinking about when it comes to conflict between users on public land. So I want to introduce to you the 3 types of trapping in Montana, and FWP regulates these 3 types of trapping. And regulations are the same across the state. It's just who's controlling what region and where you are, FWP wants to think about. So the 2 first types of trapping that I want to talk about are trapping of fur-bearer animals and then trapping of wolves. And then we'll talk about the 3rd type. When you think about fur-bearer trapping and wolf trapping, think generally wintertime. In Region 2, almost all of this is happening between November and the end of April. Okay? So I've got, and also just general information about these 2 types of trapping. You need to have a license. If you want to trap a fur bearer, you have to purchase a license. You would also have to purchase a different license if you want to trap wolves. So these are licensed, Okay? And the regulation, the rules that you need to follow for fur bearer and wolf trapping vary pretty significantly. What you would hear from trappers is they say that trapping is a highly regulated activity. And I would say that wolf trapping is probably the most highly regulated trapping in this state. And then some of our fur bearers, generally all you need is a license and you can trap as many as you want as you can during the season. Okay? So it varies a bit here. One of the other things that I want to say that I don't have up here for these two types of trapping is that if these types of trappers trap your dog, they need to release the dog and notify FWP within 24 hours. Okay? That will not be true for the third type of trapping. Okay? So let's talk about, I've got a wolf here. Who are fur bearers? Wolves are pretty obvious. When you talk about a wolf, you got a single species, right? Who are fur bearers?
Beavers?
Beavers, yeah.
Weasels?
Otters? Weasels, no. Mink, yes. Ermine.
Weasels have fur.
Yes, they do. Okay, so this is a legal definition. Thank you. It's not a biological definition, okay? And which we'll really think about when we talk about the third type of trapping, which is predators. I'd say that's a predator. So this is a legal definition, and it's also a functional definition when it comes to FWP because they consider fur bearers different than non-fur bearers. They got specific rules for fur bearers. So we got beavers, otters, mink, marten, bobcats, lynx. Yes, but not allowed right now because the state was sued. The state was sued to not trap lynx. Hares, no, they're going to fall into the third type. Fox, third type. We got 8 species of fur bearers. And you probably wouldn't know that unless you like buy fur, look at fur, or trap fur bearers.
Know this. How do they know that that's my trapping, that one's not?
Right.
How do they know that?
They don't. And that's a real key thing that is different about hunting than trapping, because as a hunter, you are pulling the trigger on a target, so you are specifying what you're going to hit, right? And if you are kind of silly about that, that's your fault, right? You're going to be, if you shoot a grizzly instead of a black bear, there are going to be repercussions for that. Traps have no specificity, and there's no one there making sure that just that specific animal gets caught. And when you look at regulations, there are allowances for this non-specific component to trapping. So I've got images of all of our fur bearers up here. Please, these are not to scale. I just wanted to show you images that you could see and say, okay, that's a critter. So here's our beaver, okay, muskrat, so the cutest muskrat I could find. Who's this critter? Pine marten, yep. Here you go with your mink. And then a similar looking critter here. River otter, yep. Who's that? Fishers. Also, the state of Montana is likely going to be facing a lawsuit for allowing the trapping of northern Rocky Mountain fishers because their populations are severely limited. And that will also be a lawsuit probably against the state of Idaho as well. And then the big ticket item, the bobcat, right? And then our last 8th species of fur bearer, that is a swift fox. So it'd be really hard to tell from this. And if you go to that Montana Wild building in Helena, they actually have some really beautiful mounts of swift foxes, which I'm not really into like petrified animals around, but it's kind of a unique opportunity to actually get a chance to look at a swift fox, for example, up close. This is about the size of a medium house cat. And they generally live out in that region 7 and 6, eastern Montana. Okay? So we got 8 species of fur bearers, so you can see their faces. What's that?
What about Wolverine?
Yeah, notice I don't have lynx on here and I don't have wolverines. When you look at fur bearer regulations, the state of Montana, because that's a legal definition and also a management definition, wolverines and lynx are also considered fur bearers, but because of endangered and threatened status at the federal level, the state of Montana has decided to prevent legal trapping of lynx or wolverines as fur bearers. But they can get into traps. Okay.
Badgers in the other category?
What's that?
Badgers in the other category?
Yeah. Okay, so let's round out our types of trapping. Well, let me finish up with fur bearers here. 8 species that we just looked at. You do need a license to trap fur bearers, and if you're a Montana resident, and you want to trap fur bearers on your own land and you already have a conservation tag, so you've bought another license through FWP, you pay $1 for all 8 of those species. Okay? If you want to trap on public land and you don't have a conservation tag, your price will go up to around $28 for all 8 of those species. So this is really different than a hunting license. Hunting license, you get a specific, you can get a doe, you could get a buck, and you have a specific region that you can go for, right? You can hunt your deer over here, you can hunt your deer or elk over here, not the same, okay? This is a seasonal type of activity, fur bearer trapping, generally from about the beginning of November to the end of April, and it depends a little bit based on the species. And the regulation, the activity that's allowed here varies significantly based on the critter that you're trapping. And it goes from being able to kill as many of that species as you want, and the beaver and muskrat and mink would be examples of this. You can trap as many as you want with your $28 or $1 license. During the season. You don't need to tell FWP anything about how many you've trapped or anything like that. Also quite different from hunting, right? If you buy a hunting license, you get a tag. That's what you are allowed legally to harvest, right? So we go from the beaver, muskrat, unlimited side of regulation to some pretty strict regulation with some of our species, like the swift fox. The swift fox this year, there was a really small quota for the state. 10 swift foxes were allowed to be legally harvested, and I don't think that quota has even been met. Fishers are even smaller. The sub-quota for fishers allowed for the entire state of Montana is 1 female in the northern part of Montana. Okay, so we go from really small amounts that you can kill here, and then 4 of our species, like the bobcat, the fisher, marten, we need to actually take those pelts into the FWP office. The pelt has to be tagged. It will have a tag put into it, and that's required to be a legal pelt for sale. Okay. Also, a number of the species, you're required to bring in the lower jaw of the animal so that FWP can get biological information about the types of animals and get a sense of population that's out there. So it really varies a bit, and it's by species. Okay. Why do people trap fur bearers? Who knows? For profit, because fur is valuable, right? But the state of Montana manages fur bearer trapping as a recreational activity. Why do people hunt elk or deer? Food? Trophy? That's kind of like a pelt. What's that? Recreation. Yeah, recreation as well. But also, you guys haven't been reading letters to the editor in the Missoulian and all these bills that are coming up about how there are too many darn elk and there are too few elk, right? A big deal about why these quotas are set up by the Fish and Game Commission is population management. When you look at deer and elk population quotas across the state, we saw 7 regions for just the entire state of Montana as administrative regions. If we were to look at deer regions, there are deer hunting districts that I don't even know how many there are. Tons, right? And each one of those hunting districts has a sub-quota, right? And so it's tightly controlled, the number of deer and elk that are killed. And the point is that population numbers vary in those hunting districts across the state. So when you think about a lot of hunting pursuit, in addition to recreation and trophies and food, it's population management, right? Fur bearer management is for recreation only. FWP does not manage fur bearer trapping as population control. It's managed as a recreational opportunity for Montanans.
Do you have any sense for the number of people that, say, purchase a license, if they can do it as like part of the sportsman's package thing that FWP has?
It is not.
Do it?
As far as that's a good question. I haven't looked at how this is a combo. I've seen a lot of the hunting licenses as combos. I've not seen fur bearers as combos. And also, you can't trap fur bearers as an out-of-state person. You can trap wolves if you want to, and the third type of trapping you can do, which is kind of interesting. The number of total licenses sold in the state of Montana, which will include wolf licenses and fur bearer, so is generally kind of goes from like the 3,000-4,000 up to about 6,000. And the number of those licenses sold is directly proportional to the fur market the previous year. Okay. So, and when we're talking about 6,000 people as like the maximum number of total licenses sold, you're still talking less than 1% of the entire population of the state. How many fish licenses, angler licenses, are sold? Well, proportion of people in the state. It's over 33%. So more than a third of Montanans buy a fishing license every year. What about hunting? 20%. It's about 25%. So when you compare the number of people who are doing hunting or fishing to trapping, it's significantly smaller population. Yeah?
Is there an age limit on trapping licenses for youth?
There are youth-specific things that are allowed, and it's just like the hunting that I've seen. It's usually around 11 or 12 when you have to flip to the adult side. They do have a youth-free trapping for muskrats. So if you're below 11, you can trap free without a license.
Because we're looking at population quotas.
Yeah.
Are we looking at strictly adults, or are we looking at the entirety of people eligible to hold a license?
For youth trapping, generally I think it's only allowed for fur bearers is muskrats. So, and muskrats are unlimited. There are no quotas for that anyway. It's a good question.
So if every one of us could shell out $28 for a license, would that take one out of the...
No. There's no limit to the number of licenses that can be sold. The limits, and that's true also for hunting licenses, although there are limited numbers in hunting districts that can be sold. But when you think about wolf hunting and trapping, you buy one license and you can either hunt with a rifle or bow or trap. Okay, one license for those 3 activities, and there can be as many of those sold as the state can sell. The way they control that, though, is the number of wolves that are allowed to be killed. So they set a statewide quota. So that's more the way they're trying to do it. Like the number of bobcats that can be trapped. That's one of those that has to be tagged, right? You need to bring it into the office. You need to call the office in 24 hours. They have a strict quota of bobcats that is usually around 1,600 for the state. And they break it down into our regions a little bit too. So they try to control on that side.
So that 6,000 includes the wolf hunting permits?
Because it's the permit is for hunting and trapping. That's a good point. Never thought of that.
What was your question again?
Oh, that includes the hunters that hunt wolves, because I run into a lot of them. It just amazed me that there's only 6,000.
Yeah, you know, so the trapping, so there must be a separation on how many who actually trapped. And it's not going to be by license, it's by how many that actually were trapping, because they do have those numbers. So I'm not sure which those numbers are taking into account. I don't think it's hunters, though, because it is a lot. Yeah, like.
I think they're separate because
Yeah.
we recently ran a thing where this last year there were like 17,000 hunting licenses sold for wolves.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Yeah. But it's one license is the point. So what they're doing is after the fact, they're saying, did you trap or did you hunt or did you do both? When they do their surveys at the end is one of the ways that they could try to keep track of that.
Probably with trappers allow them to shoot the wolf, but there's probably a hunting license for wolves where the hunters can just, they're not trapping them, they're just...
No, it's one license.
You're sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can add it on. That is part of a added package that you can add on. Because it's one quota. And it's usually about 225 or so for total wolves.
Are you sure? Because I thought I just read that there's no quota on wolves in Montana anymore.
Oh yeah, there's a quota for hunting. Yeah. And there are two separate quotas. There's a harvest, and I say harvest kind of in quotes because when I think of harvest, I think of harvesting plants, but it's called a harvest quota, and that is for a combined quota for hunting and wolves, which is usually about 225 or so. Then there's also quotas that were introduced for depredation, where landowners could kill wolves, and that was a legislative bill several years back, and that has its own quotas that are separate. So wolf trapping, the key thing about wolf trapping is much more tightly controlled than anything we've looked at so far, and it is a much tighter season. It's usually from about the mid-December to mid-February. This year it's the end of February. You need to buy a license, and check that out. You, as an out-of-state person, can purchase a license for about $260 some. Okay? You do need to pass a wolf trapper education course if you want to have a license to trap wolves. There is a pretty small limit of the number of wolves that you can kill, either through hunting or trapping. You have a combined total limit individually of 5 wolves, and that's called a bag limit. Okay, and just like deer hunting districts, elk hunting districts, there are wolf management units that are spread out across the state, and each one of those wolf management units has a sub-quota in it. Okay, so as soon as you have killed a wolf, you need to call FWP within 24 hours so that they can maintain and make sure that we aren't harvesting too many wolves in individual areas. Some of these areas can be very small, like around Yellowstone, you're talking acreage, not like square miles. The other key things about wolf trapping in Montana is you need to tell FWP what's going on. You got to bring that tag in. They also want proof of the sex of the animal attached to the pelt. They typically want other types of information like weight. You also need to tell FWP exactly where you killed that wolf. Okay. In addition to that, you are required to check your traps every 48 hours for wolf traps. Did I give you a trap check time for fur bearers? No. Okay. So that is something that is different from other states and why Montana gets kind of a low grade on the report card. This is actually the only mandatory trap check time in the state of Montana is for wolves. And then the one little asterisk because of a lawsuit about lynx. If you're trapping bobcats kind of around the Continental Divide, you need to check those bobcat traps every 48 hours to try to diminish the effects on this threatened endangered species of lynx. Yeah. No.
Well, I thought there was some movement in the legislature right now to try to do that. Do you know the status?
Of mandatory trap check time? Yeah, it's kind of dead. It was in the House Fish and Game Committee, and there were probably 40-some plus trappers there talking about how this would be too onerous. It was a daily trap check time. And that might be why it was considered pretty onerous. It's too difficult because every trapper will have a different number of traps out, but you're going to have, I mean, you could have 100-some traps out. And I don't know how many miles, you have to drive between to go get them, too. So unfortunately, that bill looks like it's probably dead in committee right now. There are going to be a whole lot more trapping bills that are in progress in the legislature. And if you've given us your email, we will try to keep you abreast of some of the important bills that are coming up. One of them is going to be mandatory trapper education for all trapping, in addition to wolves. This will be through the same committee, the House Fish and Game Committee.
What do you think would be in a trapper education class?
A lot of it is how to try to make your trap more specific. Also, how to not set traps where people and dogs are going to get into them. It also includes things like how to handle your fur. So it's a lot of practical considerations. What type of trap to choose. Those types of tips and hints on how to do things the best way. So, wolf trapping. Why do people trap wolves?
If they like to hunt elk.
Yep.
That's what they say.
Yep. There's a lot of stuff going on right now about how if we just trap and hunt more. In fact, there's a bill, I forget whether it's Senate, I think it's Senate, that is in the legislature and is still moving through that proposes to pay wolf trappers for trapping.
HB 279.
There you go. I would love to get paid for, driving my car up and down Rock Creek. Dang, I need a new truck after doing that a few times. Go fishing. Wouldn't you like to get paid for a nice camera to go take wildlife photos? And the whole point behind this person who's supporting this paying wolf trappers specifically is because elk populations are apparently too low. Which in fact is not true. When you look at elk population numbers in districts, they're at or above levels that FWP wants them to be at. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. But there are quite a number of trapping specific bills that are coming up, actually.
How do we check for ourselves?
The best way is if you just go mt.gov, right? And you can look for a link, and that goes to everything, like how do I buy a driver's license and who's the governor. And then there's going to be a link that goes to the 2019 legislative session. So when you get onto that page, you can look for a page that tells you how to look up and find bills. It's pretty straightforward. You just have to get to that third page.
Maybe search for hunting, whale trapping.
You can search by terms specifically, yeah. But the best way is usually looking at the Fish and Game Committees in the House and then the Fish and Game Committee in the Senate. That's mostly where all of these kinds of bills are going to go through, are those two committees for the two chambers in the House. And so that narrows it down a lot faster. Yeah.
There's a phone number, this is really interesting, I just discovered this year, that you can call over to Helena, and the people are extremely helpful, and you just tell them the name of the legislator, senator or representative, and they will get a message to them. So like if you're against this bill 279, you find out who's on that committee, and you just list off those committee members, they'll check them all off, and they'll, whatever message you have for them, you'll give them the message, and they're real happy and nice about it.
You can also send an email to a committee as well. You can put in, it's limited on characters, so you can't be too crazy about it. But I sent one about this hunting, this paying wolf trappers to the committee that was looking at it. So there are some really helpful, they try to make it really easy. And if it's just a simple vote no, vote yes, that's great. Most of the bills right now are dealing with committee. They haven't really gone to the houses to be completely voted on yet. So the key thing that I want to point out, besides people hunting wolves as recreation and trying to do their part for elk populations in the state, is that FWP manages the harvesting of wolves to manage the population of wolves specifically, right? By managing the population of wolves, then they can manage the rest of the animals in the state, is the concept. Yeah. Yeah, humans are often left out of that equation as animals. Okay, so that's our second type of trapping. And this is pretty tightly controlled and regulated. How many of you know where every deer was harvested last year? You can know that for wolves. You can get a dot map. Yeah.
As an aside question, where do you think the governor stands on veto power on any of the bills that might go through?
Well, I think he's in his last term, right? So he might have some big V power happening. It's hard for me to say. What I've read from the governor is that he's been pretty non-committal about specific trapping, like changes to the Constitution, right, that have been in previous legislative sessions. There was a change to constitutional terminology that trappers were really happy about because they felt like, oh, this enshrines trapping as a right in the Montana Constitution. He didn't sign that bill. That was 2 sessions ago, nor did he veto it, but he was running for re-election.
So it passed because he didn't.
Yeah, so it is law. And what that means in terms of constitutional privileges and whatnot, who knows. But it's hard for me to say what his stance is. He does seem to be much more open-minded about the rest of the public and not so under the boot of trappers and NRA, I would say. And he's not running for re-election, at least not in this state, right?
Running for president, though.
Yeah, President Bullock.
He is endorsed by the Sportsman's Alliance.
Oh, right.
And he has to dance to their tune.
Okay. So let's talk about the third kind of trapping. And this is actually probably most of the trapping that happens in the state. And is not part of the numbers of that 6,000. And certainly is not counted in wolf licenses or anything. This is, and I'm defining these the way FWP does. The first type of trapping, wolf. Second, fur bearer. Third type of trapping in the state is the trapping of predators and non-game wildlife. Okay, this happens year-round. There are no seasons. There are no quotas. There's no license requirement, let alone education requirement. There's no reporting of anything, like how many animals you've killed. And most notably, there's no reporting of trapped dogs to FWP. Fur bear trappers and wolf trappers, as of a few years ago, the regulations changed. The Fish and Game Commission added that if a wolf trapper has a dog in his or her trap, they need to tell FWP about that within 24 hours. Because FWP is trying to get some numbers on how many dogs are getting trapped. The reason why I bring this up in this situation is no reporting of trapped dogs is because one of our key predators that's trapped year-round in the state is a lot like a dog. And it's a coyote, right? And so coyote traps are baited to draw in coyotes. And they will have carrion or some kind of scent lure like coyote urine or pheromone, something like that. And those types of baits have been shown to draw in domestic dogs just as well as they draw in coyotes. And this happens year-round. This is not a winter-specific situation, right? And how many people trap coyotes in the state? I have no idea. Neither does FWP know. The best estimates they have, and for even just the number of coyotes that are killed, is the number that are sold for fur.
Have to shovel and shut up.
Yeah.
Shovel and shut up.
I want to point out that this trapping regulation is just the same as hunting. You can shoot as many coyotes as you want any time of the year. All you have to do is be a Montana resident for doing that.
You can even chase them through snow, for example, and run them over with your snowmobile. Tires have no protection.
Much like all the rest of these animals that I'm going to talk about. So who else falls into this category? This is a legal definition. A predator is a legal definition of a kind of animal, just like non-game wildlife. Wolverine, that's a fur bear. Badgers, raccoons, yeah. So let's finish out the predators here. These are the rest of our predators, the wily predators here. So long and short-tailed weasels and spotted and striped skunks are defined legally as predators. Badgers would be non-game wildlife. But before we get to badgers, when you think non-game wildlife, I want you to think about this critter here. It's a red fox. Bigger and more well-distributed across the state in North America than swift fox, right? So this is sort of the poster child of non-game wildlife, and coyote is the typical example of a predator. Okay? So who else would be non-game wildlife that people are trapping? Badgers and raccoons are probably the most next common species that are trapped. So there are absolutely no regulations about this, except I will say that the regulations did get some kind of input to them, and that was about 3 years ago. The Fish and Game Commission actually decided that traps that are set for these need to be set back from trails and campgrounds and roads. Until 3 years ago, you could have legally had a coyote trap in the middle of a campground. Okay? So regulations do change. That's like the only regulation I can think of for these critters. Yeah?
What's the distance on that setback, though?
50 feet.
My dog.
And that only applies to traps that are on the ground, not ones that are in the water. Okay? So I'm just going to call this general trapping in Montana. This is year-round. A lot of people have this perception that trapping is a wintertime activity. You see more trapping in the winter because that's when wolf and fur bear seasons happen. But the trapping of predators and non-game wildlife is year-round. Okay? No license, no limit, no reporting. But we do now have setbacks. Yeah?
Claire, the setbacks, you say on the ground,
yeah.
50 feet. What about in a tree?
No setback.
No, because there's no setback at all in trees.
Aerial and water sets, no setback. Okay. So why do people trap these types of critters? One of the key reasons this happens is to control livestock depredation. And when I say livestock, I include things like chickens in that, right? Raccoons, foxes, right? Coyotes can do significant damage to sheep. And so that's one of the main kinds of reasons why this activity happens in Montana and other western states is ranchers just want all types of varmint predators off their land. And that will happen every year. And if I was a trapper, this would be what I'd do. This is where the money is. Because you get paid to come in and trap critters off people's land. And if you think back to our poster children back here, this critter, if you do this in the wintertime, has some of the best fur value on international markets over the past several years. Bobcat pelt prices have dropped and fluctuated all over the place. This is where you make your money. Also, fox pelts have held their value pretty well too. So no license, no limit, and if I do this type of predator control of coyotes in the winter, right before lambing and calving season starts, I got fur now too. So if you want to be trappers, there's my my formula for you.
No, thanks.
Okay. So if we think about what's legal, what's not, we've been talking about this a little bit. One of the things that I want to do is try to convince you of some of the myths that are out there that they're not true. One of the most common myths is that traps are required to have signs that they're present along a trail or near a campground or in a public area. That is not true. The state of Montana does not require any signage that fur bearer, wolf, predator trapping is happening. That is not the case in other states. So when you talk about how Montana rates, right, this is one of the reasons why Montana tends to fall low on its scorecard, is that there's no mandatory signage required. Other states do require this. And in fact, some states require each individual trap to be flagged. So no signs are going to be out there telling you that traps are present. Some trappers do put up signs at trailheads, and that's awesome. Okay, but it's not required in regulation. The other key thing is that traps are not required to be checked regularly unless you're wolf trapping or you're in one of those lynx protection zones. And the reason why I bring that up is that your dog may be sitting in a trap for a week more, right? Because there's no requirement that that trap is going to be checked anytime soon. The other key thing to think about too, I know we're here about pets, but traps also inflict their trapping on non-target wildlife as well. Raptors, mountain lions, elk, deer, bears, right? And the longer they sit in those traps, the more likely they're not going to be alive. One of the other key things that I want to impress upon you today is that if you physically disturb a legally set trap, you are breaking the law. Okay? So that is, you releasing your dog from a legally set trap, you are breaking the law. Yes. Because you have disturbed that legally set trap. And some people have been pursued by FWP for prosecution. It's a misdemeanor offense, it's finable, and so the key thing that I want to tell you is that a legally set trap, if you do get your dog into that and you get your dog out, you have now just broken the law. The key thing you need to do is call FWP as soon as you can. And the website has information for the Spurgeon office in Missoula. You've got to call them. And that, generally, the more information you give FWP about what's happened, the better off you're going to be. It's not going to be good press for FWP to see that some little old lady released her Pomeranian from a trap and now she's being sent to jail. Yeah.
There's a big difference between being charged with a crime and convicted of a crime.
True.
So don't get upset about being charged with a crime. That doesn't mean you're going to walk away with a misdemeanor offense.
Yeah.
It's bad press.
Yeah. The reason why I bring this up, though, is that, so for example, if a trap were to damage livestock, the trapper is legally responsible for the monetary damage to that livestock. However, if you think about it, when you've got your dog in a trap or you or your kid in a trap, you've now broken the law. So this is something that I think FWP needs to be thinking a little bit about, right? It's just the way it's written makes no sense. It's like, oh, you just shot me. My bad.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other key thing is you may not release trapped wildlife. Okay, say you see an animal in a trap and it's alive and you want to be a bunny hugging tree lover and you want to release the animal from that trap, that's also illegal.
Is it a misdemeanor?
Yes, they're bunched together. Okay, and that is for a legally set trap. If it's an illegally set trap, and I'll show you the difference, you're free and clear. Okay. The other key thing is that if you have land, no one can trap on your land without getting your permission first. This also includes if you lease land from the Forest Service or BLM, like for grazing or whatnot, you are now essentially the owner, the lessee of that land. You now have, you need to provide permission for trapping to happen. So if you have a trap on your land and you don't know about it, it's illegal, you can pick it up, take it to FWP, you're fine, right? What about trapping on in Missoula city limits?
That's against city ordinance, isn't it?
Yeah, so there actually is a Missoula city ordinance that prohibits the trapping of anything within Missoula city limits. And that is even on your own land. What about if you want to trap some beaver or otter in the Clark Fork? That is legal. If your trap is in the water for these critters, that's legal. Okay? So things are a little tricky to look at. So city ordinance also prevent trapping in public parks, things like that, right? Okay. So I want to give you a sense of if you're out on a trail, if you're on Forest Service land, BLM, state lands, what's legal there, okay? And it does vary a little bit. It kind of depends on what the trap is like, but just looking at public land and traps that are on the ground, okay? And when I say on the ground, I mean dry ground, okay? In general, not in general, all of those traps must have an ID tag on them. On public land, every single trap needs to have an ID tag on it. And by ID tag, we're talking about the size of a returned stamp on an envelope, about an inch or so in length, maybe half an inch wide. It's a metal tag, and typically it's away from the business end of the trap. It's going to be towards where the anchor is. So if you see a trap on public land, you can go look for the tag. You're not disturbing the trap doing that. No tag, not legal. Call FWP.
And remove the trap.
What's that?
And remove the trap?
I would. I would also take photos. If you've got GPS on your phone, you can drop a pin on Google Maps or something. Get all that information. Okay. On public land, you're looking for at least a 50-foot setback for traps that are on the ground. If it's a wolf trap, and this is the only kind of trap you can use for wolves. You can't use our other two kinds of traps. Snares and conibears aren't legal for wolves. This is a wolf trap. This needs to be 150 feet away, okay, on public land. So there is a setback for traps that are on the ground. For, say, a coyote-sized trap, which are the ones that are on your chairs, it's a 50-foot setback from the edges of official trails and open roads. Okay. What's an official trail versus unofficial? A number, right? So if you've got a trail that has a number, it's on a map, there's a number sign, a trailhead sign, that is an official trail, as opposed to a user-generated trail, right? Like trails that are along the sides of creeks and rivers, like that kind of go from point A to point B, that they're not on a map, but they're routes that people take commonly, right? That is not an official trail. What about an open road?
That's not a gated road?
Yeah, not gated. The other key thing the FWP uses to define what's an open road is that it's accessible to a highway vehicle at some point during the year.
So what if it's got a closed gate?
Yeah, closed gate, not open.
And so what's the...
No setback. 0. This setback only applies to official trails with a number on it, on a map, and open roads.
So if it's gated...
Gated, it's closed.
Use that for walking
Yeah.
or snowshoeing or cross-country skiing with your dogs.
If you can't drive on that road at some point, if it's gated year-round, it's not open. If it's seasonally gated and you could be on that with a two-wheel drive, you would still have a setback because that's considered open. It's accessible at some point during the year. All of these old Forest Service roads that are permanently gated are not official trails or open roads typically. So no setbacks.
And there are 21,000 miles of them.
And where we live in Region 2, we got a lot of them, those old Forest Service logging roads, right? So if it's permanently gated, it's not open.
What's the name of the type of trap that you held up that is used specifically for wolves?
This is a foothold trap.
It's a what?
Foothold or leg hold trap. Yeah, and this is actually probably the nicest to deal with. The easiest, and you can get your dog out without much problem typically. So from trailheads, traps that are on the ground need to at least be 300 feet away. And then from campgrounds, recreation sites, or your house, say your house is adjacent to Forest Service land and people are trapping on that land, the closest they can be to you, your house, would be 1,000 feet, or from a campground, the edge of a campground. What is a recreation site? Yeah, think about fishing access sites along the river, right, where it's a named access point where you can get in a boat launch, or there's some kind of access into the river. You can go wading. There might be some tables there, right? That's a good example of a recreation site.
So do they allow them in the water?
Yes. Yeah. So one key thing about fishing access sites that we have kind of seen, especially in the Bitterroot Valley, is dogs have been trapped at a lot of these trails that are along the Bitterroot River and at fishing access sites and killed. And there are no setbacks if a trap is initially set at least a third in the water. No setbacks.
Is that below the average high water mark, the legal definition of?
Water is water. High water mark does not allow for trapping. So that is one key thing where that stream access law, that, you know, the high water mark, that doesn't allow you to trap in there. It's got to be water.
So if they set a trap in the water and the water flow drops,
yeah,
is that trap suddenly no longer legal?
If it was initially set at least a third of the way in the water, it's a water set.
So does all this stuff hold for the coyote traps and the things like that?
Yes, finally.
Oh, because I thought you said you could set the traps in the middle of a campground.
4 years ago, you could. So this is where I really want to prove to you that regulation does change from input from people, right? It makes no sense to have none of this apply to coyote traps, right? But it used to. I mean, it used to be that none of this applied. Now it does. Okay. In addition to those kind of general guidelines for ground traps, I do want to point out in our Region 2 area, there are some specific restrictions that we can have and enjoy as trap-free-ish areas. One of them is down by Lake Como along all the ski areas. And that is defined in all the regulations. There are no ground traps set from December 1st to March 31st. And that was in specific reaction to conflict between cross-country skiers and trappers in that area. Also, closer to Missoula, the Blue Mountain, Patty Canyon, and Rattlesnake National Recreation areas are supposed to be trap-free. However, if you read the regulations, they just limit fur bearer and wolf trapping. I think that's an oversight, but something that the Commission should be aware of. Bass Creek down the Bitterroot, there's a loop trail that is a recreation area next to the main Bass Creek Trail that goes up the drainage. That recreation area at Bass Creek is also closed all year round to ground traps.
But is predator and non-game trapping allowed?
If you read the regulations right now, it would be, because it doesn't apply. I think it's an oversight. If you look at what the city of Missoula publishes for Patty Canyon and Blue Mountain specifically, they talk about it as trap-free, right? So I think these are really complicated. If you're not getting that, these regulations are really complicated and detailed. And I think they've messed up a little bit there. Because even FWP talks about these areas as entirely trap-free.
I always thought they were
I did too.
trap-free.
Yeah, I did too until I was rereading last weekend.
But if it's not in writing.
Right. This is something that Fish and Game should know about. The regulations don't meet what we think we know as a community.
So do you call it type 3, or what is the third designation?
It's that general trapping of predators and non-game wildlife. And the only kinds of regulations that apply are general trapping regulations. These closures are not given in general trapping regulation. Okay. Phew. It's a lot of regulation, and it varies a lot. That's kind of one of the other things I want you to get at. This is, I mean, I guess if you want to talk about really varied regulation as being highly regulated, okay. I do urge you, if you have more questions, to look at, you can download regulations off the FWP website, and I do have copies for you to take. They do change every year. Okay. So let's take a look at the traps themselves. Okay. The question is, what type of a trap is this? This is a wolf-sized foothold or leg hold trap. This is one of the key types of traps in how it's built and how it works. The other two are here, snare and a body gripping trap, or commonly called a conibear trap. I've got foothold in green here because this is designed generally as just a trap that keeps an animal there. It's not designed to kill animals specifically. These two traps, especially if you set your snares higher where animals can get their necks through them, and the conibear traps are designed to kill. These are considered lethal traps typically. That's why I've got them in red. Snares can kill you by suffocating you, strangling you to death. Body gripping conibear traps are designed, if they go around you the right way, they will grip around your neck and your head, and your trachea can get crushed, and also the ability to breathe is diminished. Okay? So these are three types of traps. Okay? And the key one that I really want you to be focused on is the green guy here, because you can get your dog out of this fairly injury-ish free, hopefully. Okay? Really, the problem begins to happen the longer a dog stays in this trap. You get circulation changes, swelling, right, and then you get loss of tissue down here. If it's a really little dog and a big trap, you're going to have problems. Okay, this first trap that I want to show you, they're on your back seat, the back of your chair. There are several of them per row that you can look at. And this is the snare. And what you can see is snares are pretty straightforward in their anatomy, how they're going to work. One thing that I want you to notice is that these snares are braided galvanized wire. And these snares are store-bought snares. I actually went and bought snares at Cabela's yesterday. Yes? And I do want to point that out, that if you're really serious about trying to work these traps and feeling comfortable with them, go buy one. And you can get practice. Okay? I want to show you that this is a braided cable of individual wires. Each one of these has roughly about 20 smaller wires braided in there, right? And what that does is it gives it high tensile strength and lots of flexibility. Okay? What that also means is that to cut this thing, which is the best way to get your dog out of it, your wire cutters aren't going to cut it, literally, because this is braided. Okay? So snares are actually pretty straightforward in their anatomy. What you can see is you have this anchor end down here, which is where your ID tag would be hanging out. This anchor end will be attached typically to more wire or chain, and over here will be an immobile anchor. And that might be like a piece of rebar that's driven into the ground. It could be a tree, a fence post. Okay? The whole point about a snare is to have this loop get smaller around the animal that's going to be trapped, and the way to do that is to pull against an immobile anchor. Okay? So your ID tag is going to be on the anchor side of your snare. Okay? What's that? So your ID tag will be over here. The loop is on the other side, right? So the animal goes through this and the loop tightens. Notice that this doesn't release, right? So in the state of Montana, you do not have to have releasing snares, okay? Except if you're in a lynx protection zone. That is a lawsuit requirement for the state of Montana, okay? So you've got this loop. Wow, I'm getting a little puffy here. Right here, right? And the anchor will be over there. The way that this loop has tightened down is because this sliding lock mechanism will move along as the animal pulls against the anchor, right? So as I pull against the anchor, the sliding lock moves, and then I'm in that loop, right? So it's a pretty straightforward kind of mechanism. One other key thing about snares in Montana that's required by regulation is that this sliding lock should break at about 350 pounds of pressure applied to it. That is there so that if livestock get a leg in this, they can generate enough pressure and hopefully other bigger game like elk to break this loop. I've seen grown men cry just about while trying to break one of these. So it's a lot of force.
I don't understand why. I can understand why the animal can't get out, but why can't?
Because it doesn't go backwards.
Well, it does.
No. So you've got it loose against the anchor right now, right? So if someone is holding the anchor side of it in your right hand, if you keep that taut, right? If I'm pulling on it the whole time, as soon as you pull, that loose gets smaller. And if you come backwards towards the anchor, it doesn't necessarily get bigger.
Oh, so if someone's pulling on it.
Yeah.
Then,
It only gets tighter.
why can't I, as the rescuer?
As a rescuer, all you need to do is work that lock backwards.
Oh, okay.
But that's easier said than done because you're going to have dog hair in that. And you've got a brand new, shiny snare out of the bag right there. There's no rust. That sliding lock has never been used. It's never been pulled against, so it's not bent at all, right? So it's actually going to slide its best right now. And when these snares, if they get reused, they get left out there, they will have some tarnish and bending on them, which makes it even harder. So where are snares set? Yeah, snares, and let me shut the lights down a little bit here so you can see these images. Most often snares are put out, and they're put out in great numbers because they're pretty cheap. I bought some pretty expensive snares yesterday at Cabela's. I bought 12 for $19.99. Okay, and that's pretty expensive. If you buy your galvanized cable and your sliding locks and you do all that and you make your own snares, you can do these for easily 50 cents a piece. Okay, so typically snares are put out in places where animals are already going so that you can see evidence of where animals typically are going and you can put your snares there. A great place and commonly where you can find snares is attached to fence lines, because the fence serves as a great anchor, and also the fence serves as a place where you can see where critters are going because they're crossing the fence. In this case, you can see this kind of dug out area where the fence wire even kind of sometimes get pushed up, right? This is a place where critters are crossing the fence. And you can put that loop there, and as the animal passes through the loop, it will catch the loop and pull against the fence post. Okay. What about in this image here? What's going on in this image? What I'm going to try to do is give you, I'm going to call it your trapper vision, but it's really trap vision. This is an indication that critters are going through here. What are you seeing that says critters are going through? Yeah, this area where the grass has been pushed down or it's not growing as well, right? In the wintertime, you can probably even see snow tracks, right? So this is a pretty common area where your dog might be like running through, sniffing stuff. Okay, and right here, and I've actually tried to increase the contrast on this image so you can see this as well as possible, is a snare set up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, what about in this snowy image over here? What is it that you pick up on that says critters are going through? Yeah, you see the concave area, the tracks in the snow, right? You also see that there's this sort of clearing area where the shrubs aren't and trees aren't growing as well because they're probably getting trampled a fair amount. And right here you see a snare. Okay. So no signage to say that a snare is there, but these are game and trails where critters are going.
Are those snares, are they right on the ground? It's kind of
No, these are actually up above the ground, but as legally, what Montana would say, if this is 4 feet or less, this is a ground set. If this is 4 feet or higher, it's in the air. If it's in the air, no setback. Really?
Huh. Yeah, because I was thinking if it was on the ground, it would, I could see a dog stepping in the middle
Yeah.
and then lifting its leg and clearing it.
Yeah, so the way I'm showing you, this would be something that would go around the body or the neck of an animal. Snares can also be set parallel to the ground so that they'll catch a foot, right? And there, it's more just a restraining, almost like a foothold trap, is going to be really injurious typically with that type of snare. The ones I'm worried about for your dog are around your neck, or their neck, because you only have minutes to get your dog out of that alive.
And those snare traps are legal anywhere?
As long as you're following the setbacks for the 50 feet, right, because it's a ground set, on public land, sure. And the 1,000 feet for campgrounds, 300, right? And you have to have that ID tag. Okay. And these snares are also going to be out year-round because they're really commonly used for the critter general trapping, like coyotes and foxes and badgers. And in fact, I could read you the thing the package that said, where do I set the snares? If you want a raccoon, do it this way. If you want a badger, do it this way. So snares are a lot of that general trapping kind of activity, which is year-round. So I also want to show you that snares can be up in the air. I'm not worried about your dogs for aerial snares. I want to give you a sense of trap vision here. Okay? So in this image, besides some more obvious things, what's unusual to you here? This is an image taken from a trap line up in Canada, and I blurred her face here. Yeah, it's a her. And these are pine marten, and a successful trap line here for sure. So besides those things, what do you see that's unusual here?
It's unusual that there's all three at one time.
Yeah, I also want to show you this, that you oftentimes and typically traps, not just snares, all traps, you're setting out multiples of them. Say along a trail, 50 feet away from the trail, up a drainage, around a riparian area. So you're going to have multiple traps in an area. And commonly what people talk about is a trap line. And trap lines can go for a mile or so, and you'll have traps every so often along that line. And a trapper would walk along a trail, like one of those official trails potentially, and they'll walk off every so often, every 50 yards or however much they want to do it, and they'll check their traps. Okay, so in addition to the multiple traps that you're seeing here, give you this sense of trap lines, how traps are set up, I also want to make you see this. And then if you look further down here, you can see additional diagonal poles like this. And I know in our neck of the woods we've got lodgepole pine, and we think about pine dripping over, and it's like, what's unusual about that? What's unusual about that is when you start to see this regularly, every 50, 100 yards or so off the trail, somebody's doing that, okay? And the point behind this is called a lean pole. And the whole idea is that critters like pine marten, bobcat would go up here towards bait. and between them and the bait is the trap. So in your trap vision, lean poles should be some signs that tell you that trapping is present in the area. You would see this every so often along this trap line here for aerial sets like this. I'm not worried about your dog going up this, but the fact that there are aerial sets in the area makes you think that there could also be ground sets that your dog can get into as well.
And so if it gets caught in this, we're sunk.
No. Okay? You're not sunk if your dog gets into a snare, and they're set on the ground regularly. The key way that you would get your dog out of this is, so say our husky here goes through this. And this is the worst scenario. If your dog gets a foot in this, I'm not as worried because your dog's not dying right now, right? So notice how it's not relaxing, okay? So anytime this dog starts to pull more, it will tighten even further. These loops get incredibly small depending on how the snare is built. There was a father-son over by Livingston that talked to Footloose several years ago. And they were on state land and they noticed a deer next to a fence that wasn't moving. It didn't really look like it was in good shape, like it kind of been there for a while. And they went up to it kind of cautiously, and the father said, God, I swear there was like this piece of wire just sticking out of the back leg of this deer. He never even saw the loop on the back leg of a deer. That tells you how tight these loops can get, right? I mean, deer hair is not very long. You don't got a lot of fat on the back leg of a deer, right? So I just use this as a way for you to see, even with like the 8 millimeter long hair on this husky, I can't really see the loop. I can now on the white part. On the back, I can't really see it. The collar's I can just make it out. And I didn't even pull this that tight, right? So dogs will vary in how they're going to react to this. I would expect probably if I were a dog, I would pull for my life. And I wouldn't know anything different. And every time I pulled, it would get tighter and tighter. Right. So now, the best way to get your dog out of this is to cut the loop, right? You can try to work that lock backwards. And if you have enough time to do that, that's what I would certainly do. The best case scenario is to cut the loop. And what you want to do is you want to cut the loop on the back. That way you're not going to injure anything that's on the neck. You've got major blood vessels, you've got your trachea here, right? Go on the dorsal side, and the best tool for this is a cable cutter. If you look at the jaws of this cable cutter, do you see how they're sort of C-shaped? Right? If we compare the cable cutter jaws to, we'll just leave our suffocating husky there, compare the jaws to a wire cutter. Right? Wire cutter jaws are like scissors, and if I try to get in there with these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to poke the skin because that loop is really tight. And what I found with wire cutters trying to cut this braided cable, what it tends to do is it just kind of mashes it down. It doesn't cut it very well, and then the harder I try to push with the handles, it just kind of pushes the cable out of the jaws because of how they're built. Right? The cable cutter jaws actually grab around the wire. Right? It's got these rounded blades to the jaws. Also, you can see that the cable cutters aren't pointy. They're rounded, right? So you can get in right up against the skin of your dog, and you're not puncturing your dog, right? So the great thing about these is I can just get in here and we'll have Dr. Prince tell us, wow, that's really deep in there. I'm actually getting a little bit of skin. And right now I can feel those jaws grab around the cable of the snare. And all I need to do is cut. And the loop is gone. right? You don't want to cut back here towards the anchor. Why not? It won't, yeah. Well, that's another thing. That I'm just talking traps right now. You don't want to cut over here because that won't make the loop any better, right? If this was, you'd still have the loop around the neck, right? You've got to cut the loop, and that's the only way to release that loop right away. If you don't have cable cutters, what you can do is try to work that sliding mechanism backwards, right? So say this is around your neck. What you want to do is find the sliding mechanism, and they vary. Some of them you guys have like kind of bent pieces of metal. You can see this one I've got is a black pivoting piece here, and it actually only really opens. You can kind of get that pivot and then it will open. So you can work that mechanism backwards, but that will take time.
Yeah, can you try that around that? I know the prop is light, much lighter than the dog, but can you hold the dog up in your arms and do that with one hand?
One hand?
Well, you've got to get the weight up. You've got to hold the dog up, so it's no longer being strangled.
Well, once that cable's locked, the dog's still being strangled.
Yeah. So I can with this.
Okay, you could. Okay.
Yep.
But you hold it up to take the tension off of that.
No, I wouldn't hold it up. What I would recommend, and yeah, no. I don't know how your dog got up that lean pole. Don't worry about your dog getting into an aerial snare unless he's crawling or she's crawling up trees. Think about along that fence line, right?
Okay.
Along the ground, that's what I'm more worried about, okay? So, however, you do want to be mindful about how you're going to approach your dog. I'm kind of assuming that your dog is not very fully conscious, potentially, because one of the big problems is knowing where your dog is in a snare. And one of the reasons why I wanted to show you those critter trails through the snow and the grass and show you the lean poles is that it tells you that there's trapping in that area. And if you see your dog running off down one of those game trails, this could be there, right? So you got to be aware where your dogs are. I'm a huge advocate for responsible dog ownership, right? But even so, hunting dogs, my dad and his friend up Nine Pipes, hunting dog, they were hunting game birds, and dead 50 feet away in a snare. Right? Because they're just waiting for birds to fly. They're not watching the dog. And the dog can't make noise, right? So one of the good things potentially about your dog being kind of decapacitated is it's probably not going to be biting you. But what I would do is I would approach from the behind, right? So you can try to make sure your dog doesn't run off. As soon as you cut that loop, your dog might want to hightail it out of there. And maybe get in another trap, right? So another thing to do, although it would be really hard, because you probably have minutes to do this before your dog is dying or dead, is put a leash on. At the very least, have a collar on this guy so that you can try to keep them and not let them run off.
And so you're saying that if I clip my dog out of there to save my dog's life, I'm guilty of a misdemeanor?
If that is a legally set snare, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. That's how the regulation is currently written.
Misdemeanor is certainly worth the risk, but still.
How pathetic is that? You're going to kill my dog.
Yeah.
And it's my fault to say that.
Nobody's going to prosecute.
The kind of bait typically on those aerial traps, and it depends on the critter you're trying to draw up there. Like for those marten, it was probably a piece of carrion.
Like my hound could totally climb that pole.
They're pretty small, actually. Like you're probably talking towards the end of that, just a few inches in diameter. It's a good hound, but yeah.
If they trap and kill my dog, are they responsible for the cost?
No, but they are if it's livestock. If it was livestock, they would be, yes.
So my dogs are all rescued. But let's just say I have a high pedigree dog and I get $1,000.
Yeah, absolutely. Some bird dogs are incredibly valuable in terms of money. You've got herding dogs. I don't even begin to know how much those those Anatolians are. you're talking thousands of dollars each dog, right?
Worth more than your livestock.
Yeah.
Certainly worth more than
So this next type of trap, I will show you guys after we've had a chance to hear about getting some of the first aid after we get our dogs out of traps. I do want to introduce you to this second type of lethal trap, and I'll show you guys ways of getting your dogs out of these. I will say these conibear traps are very difficult to work. They take practice. And I can't imagine doing this while you actually have a dog in front of you. People who know what they're doing have lost their dogs in these. So, but I want to have you be aware of these. Just like our snares, they can be in the air, they can be in the water, they can be on the ground. And they're built in a really weird way. So I want to show you, and I've got a handout for you about how to release your dog from these body gripping traps. What you can see with the anatomy of this, we're going to have an anchor side here. Here's that ID tag. This will go to more wire, cable, chain to an immobile anchor, like a tree, a fence, a rebar in the ground, right? And when we look at the other components of this, the real energy in this trap is these coils here that are on both sides of the conibear trap. This is all of the potential energy to drive the force of these jaws to close around the animal that gets into this. So what happens is the animal will move these trigger wires here as they move towards bait, or if this is along their typical route, say you're a beaver and this is near your lodge, or this is one of the slides you use to get in and out of water, you move through this, you trick the trigger wires, you trip them, and that causes this dog latch up here to get popped off. And what then happens is the jaws come around you and come over you and crush you. So this is a medium-ish size conibear, and they vary in size a little bit. I really don't want to play with the absolutely larger ones, but we've got them up here for you to work on. So what would happen is your dog would see these trigger wires here. I'm going to try to be very careful. This is a really nasty trap. So the dog would have something like bait over here, and then what you can see is the jaws come around and clamp down around the animal. And I know that's really gruesome looking, but this has happened along the Bitterroot more than once. Okay? So the way that we want to open this is we want to, what people want to do is they want to do this, right? That won't do anything. And in fact, that's making it worse right now because I'm squishing it on their head. You can see how this is a lethal trap this way, right? Okay? What we want to do is get these coils to come back together. Then the jaws are released. There's no tension on them. Okay? Now that's a little easier said than done. If you've never seen this, you wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't have a clue. I've actually seen online this guy in Wisconsin who came upon a dog that had one of these that didn't go in that way. It clamped around the dog's head from the sides. So the dog was alive, and no one else was around, and the dog had somehow been released from the anchor. Not sure, maybe it was a bad anchor. And here's this guy who doesn't know what this is, never seen it before. It took him about 10 minutes to get it off the dog, which is phenomenal if you think about not even knowing how this works. So I want to show you these conibears because they do exist. My biggest concern for your dog is in the water, because larger sized conibears in the water that would be set, say, for beaver, like this is a fairly large conibear. The jaw size is measured in square, right? This is about 10 to 12 inch square conibear. A good beaver, potential otter, right? And no setbacks, right? So this can be right at a fishing access site when you get out of your car. Yeah.
Do you know what caught that dog in Lolo?
In Lolo?
Yeah, there was a dog that was caught at the river access in Lolo. You know what kind of dog?
I don't. That was just fairly recently. Yeah.
I was curious.
Yeah.
I used to take my lab there all the time.
Yeah, one of the things, if you are consistently, remember beaver trapping, and that's my main concern, like you're not setting those for coyotes, stuff like that. Beaver trapping is seasonal. In our neck of the woods, it will be done at the end of April. But if you are really concerned about conibears, and they are along the Clark Fork, call FWP, see if they might know. They may not know because they're not required to be told. But at least FWP now knows that you want to know. Yeah, Mike.
I just comment though, you will find them other places.
Oh yeah,
I had a dog in one up the Kootenai Creek Trail by Stevensville quite a number of years ago.
How large was it, the trap?
It was the bigger size.
So that shouldn't, was it in the water?
No, it was about 6 feet from the trail.
But
that was before they had the 50-foot setback.
Well, no. So if you have a large-sized conibear, it must, if it's 7 inches or larger, it needs to be in a container that restricts access to it.
Well, this one didn't, but
yeah.
Just depends what rule.
How did you get your dog out?
I did, and I'm not going to say you'd want to try this, but I've never seen one before in my life. And it was on the dog like this, side to side, and I was able to get it out, but it was a heck of a deal because the springs were so strong.
They're really tough. And actually, trappers use a tool, and I'm waiting down that sign out there. There's actually a metal tool. You can also buy it at Cabela's if you want. One of the tricks that is in that handout is to use a belt or a leash. One of the other tricks I can show you are zip ties to get these off. But even knowing how those work, it's really hard. So that's why I want to skip ahead to foothold traps, because that you're much more likely to get into, because that's going to be a typical coyote set year-round, and those are really baited for dogs. Okay. The key things about conibears is I would practice with them. I do want to show you one trap vision here, okay, around the water, so you can kind of see what to look for. You guys can see that, yeah? Yeah. Okay. So what do you see that's unusual besides the trap? Yeah. So some of you are picking up on this. I picked up on these. I'm like, what's the picket fence there for, right? You know, a couple of them, okay, but yeah. You got good trapper vision. And what's this here for? Yeah, so if you were, say, coming from the dry side here, and you're like, do-de-do-de-do, I don't know about that, and the last second you want to verge off, like go off, this keeps you on line, right? So all this was put here to make the animal go through the trap. Okay? And the other key thing that I pick up on are cut ends of things, right? That's not natural. Okay? So let's switch to foothold traps. Those are the key things that I think are going to be really common for you to have with dogs because of wolf and coyote foothold traps. And you can get your dog out of these. Okay? And hopefully injury-free. The longer a dog sits in this, the more likely you're going to have real injuries. Okay? Foothold traps come in different sizes and slightly different designs, but they all act the same way. You can see this trap up here in the corner, okay, and then over here on the left side, we've got another foothold trap, right? This is called a long spring trap, foothold trap, and then up on the right is a coiled foothold trap. They work the same way. Okay? I've got coyote-sized foothold traps under some of your chairs to look at. And this would be some of the chain that would go towards the anchor. So if we look at the anatomy of these foothold traps and how they work, they're fairly straightforward. We can see that the real key here is to setting off this trap to make it go, is you would step down on this pan, right? So as soon as you step down on this pan, what that will do is it will flip this little safety catch, and then the jaws will slam shut. So I've got one of our coyote-sized traps here. Let's grab a stick. No. Okay. And you can see with smaller dogs, the bigger this trap, the higher up it's going on the leg, probably more likely bone issues, right? So we step on this, okay, and now your dog is caught, okay? So we just hit that pan and the jaws come shut, okay? So to get your dog out of this is actually going to be pretty straightforward. So let me just show you how we do this. If you want to open this thing up, what would be your first inclination? So what happens commonly is people want to pull on the jaws, right? No, you guys are like, no, I wouldn't do that. I probably would if I had no clue about this, right? Because I see that around the dog, and it's the first thing I want to open up. I urge you not to do that because you can get cut. The trap that I have has some rubber on it, but they all vary. And if this is just plain metal here, you can get cut doing this, right? So those of you who said, no, what are you going to go look for? Yeah, these are the levers of the trap, right? If you have a long spring trap, what you want to go for is pulling these together, right? Okay. Yeah. And I would urge you to not use your hands on this for at least a couple of reasons. You might need your hands for something else, okay? So the other thing that I want to tell you is before you go in and deal with your dog, I don't know if you've got multiple dogs. I know Nick has 2 little dogs at least, right? 4? Or say you're hiking with someone else who has a dog, right? One of the things that can happen, this dog will make noise. And I'm always I'm always thinking about bringing in this noise so people can hear it, because it is kind of otherworldly to hear the noise that comes out of a dog that's trapped. And what can happen is dogs that are also with you hear that noise, and they want to go right towards that sound. Right? And what I'm going to tell you right now is that there are probably other traps where this one is. These traps, you're not going to take this and put this out and just leave it and go home and hope that that's there, right? Remember, you got your trap line, and what you're going to do is you're going to set up a bait or a lure station, and you'll have multiple traps around that single piece of bait or lure. So before you go in towards your dog, get your other dogs restrained, because you don't want to get them into traps. You don't want them to interact with your dog right now, because that can lead to other injuries, right? Remember, your dog isn't dying. That's the good thing. So keep your brain together about this. So think that there could be other traps. Also, if you've got kids, make sure that they're not running towards Fifi or whoever, right, trying to console the dog. For 2 reasons. Your dog can bite your kid, and your kid can get into a trap, too.
They're not livestock, so they don't have to take care of your kid either, right?
Right, nor you. I mean, there's a woman from Bozeman who was life flighted out because of heart issues that happened from this issue of releasing your dog. So what I urge you to do is keep calm and look for other traps. What I would suggest you do is grab a stick if you happen to be around places where you can grab a piece of dead wood. If you're in a place like sagebrushy, there's not sticks around, just kick the ground with your boots. Okay? And I'll show you this. These traps are not on the surface. They are buried just below the surface. So you actually really want to scuff up the dirt, move that with your piece of wood to set those other traps off, right? Okay, now you come into your dog, and I have not had to deal with this, but this dog may be calm, it may not, okay? This dog could bite you, and you've got another problem to worry about, right? So what I urge you to do is to try to restrain the biting end of this dog, Okay, and I know that Dr. Prince is going to give us some ideas of how to handle this. One thing you could do is take your coat, put it over the head, take your shirt, even your pack, right? And maybe that will help keep them more calm, possibly, but at least it's a way for you to kind of like keep the head with your coat on it away from coming around to bite you. The biggest issue is the dog turning, right? And if you've got a little dog, you might even want to take it and put it on the ground so that you can restrain it. If you've got a big dog, what you would probably want to do is come from behind after you've got that head there. If you've got someone with you, they could try to restrain the head from moving, and you come from behind and you can control the dog with your legs.
You can break the dog's leg, though, can't you, by having the...
You shouldn't.
I mean, if you put the dog to the side and the dog... and
This will move with the foot.
Okay, but how is it for releasing it, though?
What you'll want to do is do one lever and then a second, and you don't have to do them all at once, and it should be okay, but you'll have to deal with that. So the key thing that you want to do after you've had some peace of mind and you've made sure that your dog isn't going to bite you and nobody else is going to get in traps, you're not going to get into a trap, right, is you want to push these levers down. And what I'm going to do, if you can stand up and watch this, it helps to push against something rather than just doing it in the air. What I would do is step on one lever, and I'm just going to transfer my foot to that lever now, okay? And then what I'll do is I'll move over and open the other lever, and right now the jaws are open. There's no pressure on those jaws. Even just stepping on that first lever lessens the pressure on the jaws, keeping them closed. If you can, this is really hard to do, you could stick a stick in here right now, right? And then you don't have to worry about it. Because as soon as I step off these levers, what's going to happen? It's going to go again, right? The reason why I use my feet is because they're stronger with my legs and my arms. Also, I'm not going to cut my feet through my shoes on the levers. People get cut on the levers because they don't have padding on them, okay? The other thing that I've been told is that dogs, oh my goodness, dogs, some dogs, as soon as you do this, there's nothing keeping the jaws don't fall flat open necessarily, right? And sometimes dogs just stand there. How dare they? But they just stand there like they're in shock, right? And they don't move. And so you've got your hands on the levers and you're just like, so that's why I also recommend that you use your feet. So you've got your feet on the levers and you've got your hands available to move your dog and handle your dog, right? Also, when you use your feet, you're not putting your face next to the biting side of your dog, okay?
Yeah, when I was a kid, the traps that I came across had teeth.
Yeah.
Is that what? Is that outlawed now?
I've never seen, so Nick's asking, and we see this, you can actually Google, like, trap or animal trap, and you always see these images of a trap that has serrated, like, interlocking teeth on the jaws, right? I haven't seen any regulation or statute that outlaws the teeth on a foothold trap, but if you think about that, that's a horrible design from a trapper point of view, because what that's going to do is it's likely going to break the skin, and then what can happen is the animal can twist off their limb much more readily because that skin is broken. It's also probably going to cause fracturing more likely. So in reality, without the teeth, it's a much more effective restraining trap and be more successful for the trapper. So the key thing about these is that they can be on the ground, they can be in the water, and they, especially if baited for coyotes or wolves, will draw in your dog just as equally. Okay? No signs. What would you look for to know that these traps are around? Say in the water. Yeah, look for what we saw with that conibear, the sticks, right? If it's in the water, you're not using bait typically, you're just trying to predict where critters are going to go. So can show you these images that you can look. This shows you how they're buried. You dig a little hole, then you sieve the soil and duff over it, right? And you might also see in the wintertime some disturbed soil around the trap. That's a good indication that something's going on. Trappers may actually set up sticks on the ground as well to direct animals to step into the trail. This is an example of a ground set trap, a foothold trap. Where's the trap? Yeah, right? What's in there? Yeah, that's probably a scent lure, right? That you could buy commercially, something stinky that you really want to look at. These are scent lures, right? They're on this fabric, and the trap's going to be there. And what will happen is multiple traps will be set up around that lure station. And that's what I'm worried about, are all the other traps here, okay, that you have to think about. What you see here in the wintertime, good indication something weird's going on here. You got all this soil on top of the snow. Something made that happen. And you see footprints, right? And you see all these things in here set up to move an animal into a particular way. There's probably some traps in here. Oops. See these places, right? My dog loves to go down those places in the water, and they get all muddy, right? This is just like the sticks we saw before, trying to direct the animal to not go up here, but to go out this way, right?
Is it legal to move the sticks?
Yeah, that's not a trap.
Yeah, okay.
Where's the anchor?
Buried down into the water?
Yeah, so notice that these two foothold traps are carabinered together. You can see the chain down here towards the anchor. And this is not unusual that in a water set, the anchor is deeper out in the water. So I've had a question, how do we open this trap when this is all squishy and soft? This is these are two foothold traps. Yep. They're bigger, probably.
Wow.
Remember, you gotta push against something. You gotta get those levers pushed against something. What I would try to do is get something solid under those traps, right? You could try to come up onto the log, maybe possibly onto the dry ground, but that's why this anchor's here, so critters don't get away and do that. In fact, they are likely more going to drown out here. What if you could try to put sticks underneath this? What if all that fails? Open the beener. Take the dog and the trap with you to solid ground, right? Remember, this is anchored. You can unanchor it. It may be wrapped with wire, but if you need to, you can unclip it from the anchor.
I have enough adrenaline, believe me.
Yeah. This is just like what we saw before. And this is painted white so you can see it better.
Oh, that helps the dog a lot.
Well, it's for you. This is off of a website. It's a blog where trappers are sharing how-to information. And you can see, actually, this has been flagged. And I don't recall that this was flagged just for demonstration. This may be flagged so that the trapper knows where the trap is. So you might get lucky that way. But besides the pink and this painted white trap, this is where critters are going, right? Okay. And then besides that, my dog would be just full of mud, right? What else do you see? Yeah.
Instructions on the side so they go right.
Yeah. What I first noticed are these cut pieces. For some reason, I don't even notice these bigger things that have been put there. I noticed these two cut pieces of wood, right? And they're like somehow like right in the same spot, kind of close to the bank.
But those aren't mandatory, are they?
No.
Put those cut pieces like that?
Well, you do need to have this kind of anchored so it will stay there. And if it's a conibear, you're going to need those lateral things for that. But that's what I first noticed in this image. And so this is where critters want to go, is through the green arrow. You can notice this is not natural, right? And then these parts on the side have been put there, right? You can see that there's also a secondary entrance and exit, right? And this brush is blocking that path now. Okay? So these are things that you can notice as your dog is heading towards the water, right? not signs, and not necessarily that pink opening. So what I'd like you to do is look at these traps, and then I would want you to hear from Dr. Prince about injuries to worry about and how to better handle your dog. Feel the tension that it takes. Just go one lever and then the second lever, and you will then be able to get your dog out. Do it standing up. It helps if you've got another person to kind of hold on to, or that stick that I was suggesting. Yeah. Yeah. Notice your jaws aren't opening. That's why I want your hands to be there. There's no pressure on them. So don't worry about touching that, just stand on it. So shift your weight onto your right foot, all your body weight. Just feel like you're standing on your right foot. Yeah, and then you stand down. There you go. If you've got a bigger dog, you can actually hold on to the dog a little bit to balance yourself.
Except that when I take my foot off, the traps can go that way, and his foot's in it, his legs in it.
Well, yeah, it won't, because the leg won't move like that, right? Because it's like this. So it won't really move a lot. You will be pulling on the leg a little bit initially, right? As you step on this first side. Probably not, no. And see, I really haven't pushed that lever down at all. Right. Yeah. Okay.
So, but it's loose. Yeah. It's soft, is that right?
Yep. There's no tension on that at all. You can move. You can move with your body. No, there's no pressure on this. Feel them. Feel the jaws. Feel the jaws. Feel the jaws right now. Yeah. There's no pressure on them.
Oh.
Well, as long as you can hold on it, and that's where having a stick, as soon as you get this part open, you don't have to stay on them. So I would put on the ground. Not use your hands. Don't use your hands. So step, right? Now, step. And this is the hard part. It's a little harder in here because of the solid floor. But right now, I'm kind of, all my weight is on these. And what I'm going to do, and this will already be open because you have a leg in there, right, is work this stick in there to hold it. Then I can step off of it, and it won't be on your dog's leg anymore. So what I'd like to do is give you a chance to hear from Dr. Prince so that you can understand the kinds of issues of how to deal with your pet. Okay. So is that easier or harder to do than you thought? Harder. It's a lot harder. Yeah, those long springs are hard. So one thing in here that makes it especially difficult is the center bulge. And this is a new regulation for this year. I really want to impress upon you that regulations do change over time. This is a center pivot point that is now required for all foothold traps. And unfortunately, though, it makes these foothold traps on this really solid floor in here really teetery to open. When you're out in the field, it's going to be softer, more uneven ground, and so it won't teeter as much. But you can see it's a little hard to keep your balance, right? And if possible, you can also try to be on the ground and do it with your feet. Again, I've got more strength with my feet, and this would be on your dog, so it's not going to move as much. But I've got more strength with my feet than I do with my hands, right? If you've got a hiking companion, they can help hold you, right? Your stick that you grab to move the ground, you can use to adjust your balance as well. But if you want, you can go buy all of these traps in Cabela's right now. Okay? So what I know that Dr. Prince also has some handouts for you guys in terms of first aid. So I'd like to give her a chance for you guys to hear from her.
So I'm Dr. Prince. I'm one of the owners of Four Paws Veterinary Clinic. So my main goal is to go over just kind of some basic dog etiquette things your dog should know, things that you should know in order to help you in these kinds of situations. The little first aid brochure pretty much goes over anytime you're traveling with your dog, hiking with your dog, backpacking with your dog. These are just some simple things to have. And I tried to focus it on things that you should already have on your person for your own safety stuff that you can then reuse for your dog. So at the end, if you guys have specific questions about how to wrap legs and do things like that, I can go over it. But most of the time, the main thing is going to be, if you're just out hiking around Missoula, kind of a thing, get your dog stabilized in a manner where you're not going to get hurt, and then take him to the vet, because most things are going to require medical attention anyway beyond what you can do. So restraint is really a big thing that I feel like a lot of pet owners should practice at home and should know, and your dogs should be familiar with, because it's going to make your life 1,000 times easier in any situation that you could find yourself in. So one of the easiest things to always have on you, and every veterinary clinic has these in their lobby. We have them in the lobby to be used, and we have them for you guys to take them. So please, pick one up the next time you're at the vet clinic, and it's a slip leash, okay? This thing is invaluable. If you have this on you, there's no reason that your dog should not be able to be on a leash at some point in time. These don't weigh a thing, and you can use them for lots and lots of other things, okay? So probably the biggest thing that, with all these trapping regulations, we need to keep in mind is your dog needs to be under either voice command or on a leash on a trail. That's where they're going to be the safest. It's nice for us to all think that we can just let our dogs go run amok, but remember, there's risks involved with that, and I personally do not let my dog off the leash or on the trail when I am hiking. It's just unsafe, okay? So, a couple of things. If your dog is in a trap, keep yourself away from the biting parts of the dog. I don't care what dog it is, whose dog it is, my dog, anybody's dog. If they are hurt enough, they are going to bite you. If they bite you, you can't help them, okay? If they're at the end of a leg hold trap, there's probably a few different ways you can deal with this. If they are flailing around at the end of the leg hold trap, pulling back, get behind them. If you come at them from the face, you're not going to help yourself or help them. So if you can come behind them and, like she said, just kind of grab them with your legs. If you have them right here behind the neck, behind the ears, that muzzle can flail all over the place, but it's not going to get you. And then you can take your little friend the slip leash or a piece of paracord or whatever you have and learn how to make a muzzle. And learn how to get your dog okay with this. Practice this stuff at home. Every dog should be okay with being muzzled. Doesn't matter who it is, every dog should be okay with being muzzled. So what you do, and I'm talking about dogs with noses, okay? Do you guys have dogs without noses? Pugs and those kinds of things? They're different. Don't try to muzzle a pug. Try to just cover its head with something, okay? You're just going to find yourself frustrated. They stress out, and then they can't breathe. Their eyeballs can pop out. All kinds of things can happen with the flat-faced breeds. So if you have a flat-faced dog, just try to cover it with something that you have, like a blanket, a towel. Yeah, something like that. You can stuff their face in like the sleeve of a long-sleeve shirt to control them that way. Don't try to put a muzzle on a flat-faced dog. But if we're talking about most dogs with noses, you make your slip like this. You have them secure like this, okay? You do not put your fingers near their face. You slip that around, you cinch it, and it needs to be snug. Not to like hurt the dog, but it needs to be snug. Then you wrap it around like this, and then you tie it back here, okay? Once that is tied behind the ears, they can't get it off, okay? Once you have that dealt with, there's a couple of ways that you can deal with it. You can also kind of hold on to the muzzle back here from the head so that it can help you get into the other restraint positions. If there's two people, one person can hold the dog like this, okay? In that picture, it shows him with his hand this way towards the dog. I think you're safer if you have your hand away like this, because they can't get around quite as much and they can't move your arm quite as much. And then the other part of you holds the body of the dog. And then you can also take your arm and stabilize the leg so that the second person could undo the trap. And you can also do this if they're, say they cut their toenail or cut their paw, or you just need to do something to the lower limb of a dog. That's a really good way to hold them. And so you're holding them close to your body like this, okay? And with your face out like this, if they kind of wheel around towards your face, you're just going to sort of like push yourself away, okay? And this is something that every dog should be okay with you doing at home. Practice it, okay? The second way to hold them is once you have the biting parts secured, however you do that, is to lay them on their side. So what you do is you take your arm, put it across the head of the dog like this along the neck. Then you grab the two lower legs like this, okay? You lay them down so you kind of take their legs out from underneath them. You put them against your body so they're not going to flop, and let them go down like this. And then what you do is you use your elbow to put pressure on the neck because they can't come up and try to get you. And then you hold the two lower legs. So you want to hold the lower legs kind of above that sort of wrist part of their body and then above their hock here. And that way they can't pull it back like that. Does that make sense?
Question on that.
Yeah.
If you have a buddy,
Yeah.
because it would only work if you had a second person.
Right.
So the other two legs, if you have your dog caught in a foothold trap, if
Okay.
you have front leg, rear leg, would it make sense to secure the other two legs opposite the trap to help immobilize the dog more?
What do you mean?
So
I guess show me which.
if I'm like this, and I've got my left front foot, and you've
Right.
got me laying down, and this leg's free, would it make sense to bind these two legs together?
No. Yeah.
Or would it just cause more panic?
It just causes them to stress out more. So dogs typically feel more comfortable when they're being held if they're being held snugly, but not feeling super restricted, okay? So if you put a dog, you don't need to, when you're holding a dog like this, really the amount of restraint you need to use is pretty minimal, okay? You're just securing them close to your body so they can't freak out like that. Does that make sense? But you're not like putting them in a chokehold. You're just kind of restraining them, okay? And if you were by yourself and you had to do it, then probably keeping them like this and then being able to operate that because they're muzzled or faces covered or whatever you're doing to keep away from the biting parts, okay? And then using like your elbow or something to push them to the side just to keep them secure, okay? But again, if your dog is used to this kind of restraint, like used to you practicing this stuff at home, it's not going to be a big deal to them. If you have a dog that doesn't like being restrained, they need to learn to be restrained because at some point in their life, they're going to melt down more if they don't understand what this is all about. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
What doesn't make sense is having to train everybody that has a dog out in the wild doing exactly what we, limited group in here, are learning when all those trappers can be out there anywhere doing whatever they want. That makes no sense to me.
Send a letter to the fish.
Oh, I'll be doing all
Right.
that.
Right, right.
I've been doing the legislature.
The other thing you can do too is you can use your slip leash to help you put it around the actual neck of the dog. So your slip leash can be here, and if you need to somehow secure them, you can also step on it like this to kind of keep their face away from where you need it to be. So like if you had a hind leg caught, right, and you need to secure their head, you can kind of, while you're trying to work back here, kind of step on that and again keep them from whipping around to get you and kind of secure them a little bit too.
Yeah, I have a really gangly dog, so he's more legs than anything.
Yeah.
He gets to kicking.
Yeah.
He nets really well because he's got those giraffe legs.
And you're not going to choke them with this, you know. I mean, it's going to loosen up. So they're not. I mean, they may buck against it a little bit, but again, that's another good thing to teach them is not to do that. And that's another important thing, like with snares. If you have a dog that is trained to not pull on something like this, whether it be on their neck or their leg, they're a lot less likely to keep bucking and fighting against a snare than if they're never used to being on a leash or if they're used to pulling on the end of a leash, okay? Not that that's a guarantee, but it's a lot better off than if they're one of those really reactive, like yanking constantly on a leash type dogs, okay? Most of the leg hold traps, with the exception of some of the big wolf traps, are probably not going to break legs unless you have a tiny dog in a trap, then it, like a Chihuahua or something, and it gets it far enough down in there, then it may break its radius. Some of these big wolf traps, depending on the size of the dog and where it gets caught, potentially could, but they'll probably, when they come out of the trap, act really lame, like lift their leg and hop around. I would let them do that if at all possible. Don't try to do anything to that leg unless there's a big open flesh wound or something like that there, because they'll probably walk it off. And even if they don't and they do have a break, they're probably not going to allow you to mess with that. And if they are able to walk out, it's better to just let them on 3 legs and then get to a clinic versus trying to mess with it. Now, if you're in the backcountry and you've got a dog with a leg that's flopping around, I mean, everybody's going to want to try to do something about that. So you can try to stabilize that if you need to. And to do that, you would have to be able to lay your dog down and then use something really heavy. So in my little kit, I have pretty simple stuff like a towel, or this time of year, if you're out and about and you're worried that your dog has a break, use your down jacket or some gloves or something really heavy. The key is you want to put some sort of padding around that area to stabilize it. So if you wrapped, say the dog, you were afraid it had a broken leg or it was really flopping around right here, and you put some sort of really heavy padding over the top of it and then used like your ace bandage to wrap. And anytime you're wrapping a leg, always start at the toes and move your way up, because if you don't, you'll cut off circulation, okay? But most of the time you wouldn't have to do that. Other things to kind of have just out and about, because you may have wounds on the leg, especially if the dog has been in a trap for a period of time. Dogs will bite at their legs, they will try to chew their legs off, they will do all kinds of crazy things to try to get themselves out. So if you have some sort of a wound on the lower limb, then having like a triple antibiotic cream of some kind, which you should have in your own first aid pack, really slather that wound with the triple antibiotic cream just to keep it moist. And then use some sort of an absorbent pad. So you can use like Telfa pads. I always carry a couple like maxi pads with me for really bleedy type things because they soak up moisture really well. So then you would put that on the wound, and then you would put, I like ace bandages better because you can't tighten these down to where you're going to cause injury with an ace bandage. Vet wrap is nice, but if you don't have enough padding underneath this stuff and you don't know how to use it, you will cut off circulation and you will cause problems. So if you're unsure, don't use vet wrap, okay? It can be quite dangerous. Vet wrap. Yeah. So the thing about this stuff that people don't realize is see how much you can stretch it. So you can very quickly, in your frenzy, be wrapping it, and then all it does is cinch it down. So I would rather you use an ace bandage, like we would have that for us anyway, because it just can't tighten down quite as much. It's just not physically possible. Okay? Other things like you have a pug, okay, so if someone had a flat-faced dog with bulgy eyes and it were to get itself really stressed out, no matter what kind of trap it was in, a couple things that can happen, their eyeballs can pop out. So try not to have, you know, if it's in a snare or something, you're not going to be able to do anything about that, but with stress of those kinds of dogs, trying to keep them calm and not put very much pressure around here will minimize that. Dogs that had been in a snare, if you get them out of a snare, they're going to probably have a lot of bruising underneath here where their windpipe has been started to be crushed, and then they're just going to need air. I mean, that's really the main thing, is they just need air. And beyond that, if there's not any, you know, it just would be skin wound type things underneath here.
Is there anything you can
carry, put over their nose or something and quickly leave them almost out of it. So
Make them pass out?
Yeah, or come close enough that they're
No.
not going to struggle.
No. Mm-mm. No. But what I would try to do is if they're on the end of something, you know, and they're pulling, try to just get behind them to make them stop, and then be able to undo it, you know, or cut it or do whatever you needed to do. Same if it was on a leg. So if the snare was on a leg, it's mostly going to be just kind of cutting off circulation type things, so you're going to have swollen limbs. So once you get that off, trying to just get the circulation moving again, and that leg should stop being so swollen.
Are there any injuries that might not look that bad after a dog got caught in a trap or a snare, but could develop over days? Right.
Yeah, so any kind of circulatory type compromise could happen. So in a dog, all your major blood vessels to the limbs run across the top of the leg here, okay? So their main big blood vessels run across the top. And so if something was crushing it this way, you're going to get swelling below. And depending on how long that's been there, you could have circulatory compromise to, say, the toes. So if your dog was in a leg hold trap and you didn't find it for a few hours and the foot was swollen, you could have secondary compromise that way. So that's what you would want to look out for, is just making sure that the nail beds were pink and all of those kinds of things. But I mean, the main thing is that even if it doesn't look bad, bring it to the vet to have it checked out. Like a lot of people don't, I think. I've never seen a dog that's had a trap-related injury. I've seen tons and tons of other injuries, but not trap-related injuries. So either people don't find them and they die, or they get them out of the trap and they think, oh, it doesn't need to go to the vet.
That's what the people that have released their own pets from foothold traps have said, yeah, I got them out, they seemed fine. And I asked, did you call FWP? They say no. And I said, did you take them to the vet? And they say no. And so I really do think that that most people don't think about what might develop over time, you know, with, and I also think a lot of people, I think also talking to people whose dogs have been in these traps, even if they get their dog out within a few minutes, they're probably really, if it's not a small dog and it's not a big trap, you're probably okay. But I also feel like a lot of those people I've talked with, it has really affected them emotionally. And I think also part of the reason for not calling FWP or going to the vet, they just want to put it, they want to forget about it. They want to put it behind them. And I really, even if your dog seems okay, at least you have a baseline of what the dog's like right now. If something does develop in the next couple days, like neurological problems, like just go to the vet. And I would have your vet on your phone. In addition to a leash and a collar, have your vet number on your phone, especially anywhere. And FWP for this reason.
I never thought I would ever say that.
And you probably, and also, if you are traveling with your dog, it really is scary if you're in another place and you're not at home, so you don't know your own vet. Like, so it might be good if you know, you can't access the magic Google at all times on your trip, to look ahead and look at some emergency vet numbers to have with you, because it really does seem like the bottom line is get it checked out.
I have a dog, and it wasn't trap-related, but he came down with a secondary infection. He was fine that day. There probably wasn't anything the vet would have picked up on the day we were there. But days later, he came down with an abscess, and we ended up right back at the vet's office.
Yeah, so a lot of those kinds of things might not show up for 3 or 4 days. You know, little tiny wounds or little tiny cuts that, you know, your dog's got hair, you don't necessarily notice it, or it bites itself. So if a dog bites its own self, or if your other dog's around, some dogs, when you have a pack and one dog is hurt, you would think that the other dogs would be nice. Sometimes they're not. They will actually attack it. So be careful and conscious of that. Bite wounds in dogs are nasty. Any bite wound on any dog should always be checked out, because they, you know, their teeth are huge and they just cause a lot of abscesses and under the skin type trauma associated with that.
That's what happened to my dog.
Yeah.
He fight with another dog.
Yep.
The dog bit him on the
Yeah, especially legs, because they don't have a lot of good circulation there, not a lot of good place for it to go. Yeah. So
Thank you guys for coming. And thanks, thank you to Dr. Prince.